Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Poetry Thursday, so I wanted to talk about some interesting poetry that has captured my eye as of late. And today's poem is all about a fire and wild animals. I am referring to The Armadillo by Elizabeth Bishop. For those who don't know, Elizabeth Bishop is an Canadian-American author, American-Canadian, like she was born in Massachusetts and raised in Canada, but I don't know if she was Canadian, if she has any citizenship there. Who is to say? But she is mostly known for her poetry, which has been described as sort of distant, kind of cold, non-personal. Which is also weird because so many people I've seen have attributed her or lumped her in with the confessionalist movement, which she probably would not have liked because she did not like putting herself or putting personal details in her work, and she criticized others who did in the confessionalist movement. And for those who are familiar with my Poetry Thursday videos, you might know that confessionalism is one of my favorite branches of the poetry movement, at least in the United States and abroad as well. But I was interested in some of the work that I found from Elizabeth here, as even though it can be pointed and blunt and kind of distance from people, there's still emotion in it. You can still grasp something from it, and you can say you can learn a lot from humanity even when you're not exactly focusing on humanity. So that was Elizabeth Bishop. She's been well regarded, seen as a perfectionist. She didn't release a lot of her work because she was busy editing it and whatnot. But after her death, a lot of people have said, hey, wow, this person was really significant. So if she wasn't fully appreciated in her time, she was afterwards. And so without further ado, let's talk about Elizabeth Bishop and this poem. I will read it, do a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. The Armadillo. This is the time of year when almost every night the frail illegal fire balloons appear, climbing the mountain height. Rising toward a saint still honored in these parts, the paper chambers flush and fill with light that comes and goes like hearts. Once up against the sky, it's hard to tell them from the stars, planets that is, the tinted ones, Venus going down or Mars or the pale green one. With a wind they flare and falter, wobble and toss, but if it's still they steer between the kite sticks of the Southern Cross. Receding, dwindling, sullenly and steadily forsaking us, or in the downdraft from a peak, suddenly turning dangerous. Last night, another big one fell. It splattered like an egg of fire against the cliff behind the house. The flame ran down. We saw the pair of owls who nest there flying up and up, their whirling black and white stain bright pink underneath, until they shrieked up out of sight. The ancient owls' nest must have burned, hastily all alone. A glistening armadillo left the scene, rose-flecked, head down, tail down. And then a baby rabbit jumped out, short-eared, to our surprise. So soft, a handful of intangible ash with fixed, ignited eyes. Too pretty, dreamlike mimicry, oh falling fire and piercing cry and panic, and a weak-mailed fist clenched ignorant against the sky. So that was The Armadillo. In terms of analysis, I feel like there's a little bit worth talking about here. One in terms of narrative, I think it's easy to see what's going on in this poem. The narrator is talking about the fire balloons. I don't know what they're lanterns, air lanterns or something like that. I don't know what their exact term is, but people release them and they're not legal to do, but they still do it in honor of a saint, and it rises and rises, and usually it's harmless. But sometimes it hits the mountain and falls down. and it can catch things on fire and disrupt the wildlife. For a poem that talks about being in a place of danger, the narrator, one interesting aspect of this is that the narrator doesn't really seem too worried. Like this, it seems distanced from, as I mentioned before, Elizabeth Bishop did that, where she was featured in her poem, like she's talking about something that's happening to her, but she's not putting any emotion into the poem. And you can see that, like, oh, there's fire balloons raining down, which can possibly, hurt your house, or, damage your yard or something like that. Possibly hurt you if it lands on you. And she's just like, this is really annoying. I don't really want it. But I think in that lack of emotion, like you kind of place yourself in her shoes, and you think, well, like, wow, this doesn't really seem safe. This seems like a dangerous kind of atmosphere, but it's not completely without emotion, because you see at the end of the poem, the narrator says, "Too pretty dream-like mimicry, oh falling fire and piercing cry and panic, and a weak mailed fist clenched ignorant against the sky." And that's kind of hard to decipher. I don't really understand what's going on at the end of the poem. They talk about a baby rabbit jumping out, but I think that rabbit caught fire. Like the falling fire got the rabbit and caused it to caught fire, and the rabbit is dying as the narrator watches in horror. And like they're both struck by the fire and also alarmed, and they say like, "Oh, this is dreamlike," and like they're throwing their fist against the sky in anger at what other people are doing of this trying to worship this saint, but also not regarding others in the process. And so it seems like a very chaotic, tumultuous kind of time for the narrator. But you wouldn't really guess that from most of the poem. It seems like really peaceful. They're talking about nature, admiring the sky, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's this fire raining down, and what seems like a really calm, really beautiful night, really serene nature going on is just completely upended. And I think that might be Bishop's point in this poem, is how that is possible, and how something as innocent as maybe saint worship or something like that can quickly turn into something far worse for other people. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Armadillo by Elizabeth Bishop. A pretty solid poem, I think one that's worth checking out. There was another poem that grabbed my attention a little bit more, but I didn't really want to talk about it because it just seemed like there was too much there. It's called The Man Moth. I also recommend you go check out that one, as it's just Elizabeth Bishop writing a poem about a typo that she found in a newspaper, and it's about the fictional like man that's the size of a moth and flutters around and whatnot. It's kind of goofy, but it's also very interesting. I think that's really interesting how she's able to sort of capture these sort of maybe absurd or like tumultuous moments and fuse them with a little bit of emotion, even if she is kind of distanced from it herself. So yeah, if you read this before, or you simply want to comment on something I said here with the poem, definitely do so below in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about these poems, or this author if they do not already know. Or until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and fire raining down upon you travels. Farewell.